The room filled with the low thrum of cameras as the two leaders took questions, shifting from solemn reflection to hard-edged policy in a matter of minutes. The day had begun with remembrance and a nod to the fragile opportunity for calm in the Middle East, and it quickly turned into a wide-ranging exchange about trade, border policy, crime, a grinding federal shutdown, and the mechanics of trying to make peace while competing for the same factories and jobs. Canada and the United States were cast as partners and rivals at once, bound by geography, tightly fused markets, and politics that increasingly prize domestic production. Asked first about relief for Canadian sectors caught in the tariff crossfire, the US side signalled the matter would be taken up directly at the table. The response was measured, designed to keep leverage intact, but also to keep a door open. Tariffs on aluminium and steel, along with autos and agricultural frictions, have become both the symbol and the substance of a larger standoff about who gets to build what and where. The answer framed that tension plainly: talks are coming, details later. The tone suggested neither capitulation nor escalation, just a promise to return to it when the principles were out of the glare. The US leader then pivoted to the human fallout of the shutdown, a question that is never just about budgets and continuing resolutions, but about rent and groceries and families living on savings. He made a point of drawing a distinction between broad protection and case-by-case exceptions, signalling an intention to shield most workers while reserving judgment in other instances. Donald Trump, for the most part, we're going to take care of our people. The line was calibrated: reassurance for millions, latitude for negotiations. Pressed to explain why the two countries still hadn't clinched a broader trade understanding, the answer reached past statistics and settled on the reality of economic proximity. When both sides manufacture cars, smelt steel, and chase the same supply chains, disagreements come pre-installed. That is not a defect of the relationship. It is its defining feature. Donald Trump: we have natural conflict. We have mutual love. It was a blend of candor and courtship, an acknowledgement that affection between neighbors does not cancel out competition. That competition is concrete: locations for auto plants, the mix of domestic content, and the balance of incentives that push a factory to break ground on one side of the border rather than the other. Would Washington compromise further on steel? The answer sketched a line, some concessions on the margins, but a clear priority on domestic capability. The message: the United States will keep importing, including from Canada, but there will be a price signal at the border. The Canadian side, for its part, stressed that coexistence with competition is possible and necessary. Auto is a shared lifeblood, an integrated industry that cannot be neatly cut at the 49th parallel. The objective, from Ottawa's perspective, is a formula that lets both sides build and sell without either side feeling gutted. A reporter then brought up the politics of perception, stories of Canadians staying away from trips south, apprehension fueled by tariff headlines and loose talk about sovereignty. The American response tried to put that anxiety in context, a reminder that aversion can cut both ways when economic nationalism is ascendant. The broader case was that after years of offshoring, capital and capacity are turning back toward US plants. Factories that decamp to Canada, Mexico, and beyond are, in this telling, on a homeward trajectory because the incentives now reward them for coming home. The discussion swerved to public safety with a pointed question about invoking a rarely used domestic deployment statute. The argument offered was blunt: if local authorities cannot restore order, the federal government will not sit idle. Cities were cited as case studies, Chicago foremost among them, with the claim that a tougher posture and the visible presence of uniformed authority have changed behaviour where they've been tried. The rhetoric was vivid, designed to draw a contrast between before and after, and it leaned into a narrative of swift, muscular interventions that drive crime down and criminal networks out. From there, border enforcement and narcotics interdiction were put forward as proof points, the assertion that crossings have collapsed to historically low levels and that maritime pipelines for drugs have been choked off. The claim arrived with an unambiguous flourish: Donald Trump. 0 people were able to come into the United States from the southern border. 0. The follow-up expanded on the theme. Interdiction had, by this account, removed swathes of smuggling traffic from the seas, and the administration was determined to keep closing off other routes that adapt in response. The economic argument returned with heft tax and investment measures presented as transformational are drawing an unprecedented wave of capital commitments. The promised one-year bonus depreciation and rapid expensing were framed as the accelerants that make the numbers move, especially in auto and AI sectors, invoked as emblematic of a national industrial revival. The message was as much political as it was economic. Policy drives investment, investment drives the jobs that make the broader social compact defensible. And yet the case also banked on a cultural claim that a country cannot be great if its cities feel ungoverned. Crime, border enforcement, and a muscular federal posture were positioned not as side issues, but as the core of national strength. That convergence, economic gravity and public order, set the stage for a back and forth over why some trade partners have moved faster than Canada to reset tariffs. Geography was the offered explanation. Neighbours don't negotiate across an ocean, and the very closeness that makes commerce efficient can make deal-making harder. Canada's perspective emphasised that the relationship remains, on almost every measure, deep and constructive, massive two-way trade, intertwined supply chains, and investment flows that blur the line between foreign and domestic capital. Competition exists, yes. It is the size of the overlapping middle that demands attention. In that vein, Ottawa spotlighted an area of tight strategic cooperation, layered defence and shared protective systems on the continent. The description was reverential about the technology's maturity and potential, a notable reminder that security architecture often advances quietly under the more theatrical surface of tariff fights. Questions circled back to the shutdown's real-world effects. Why, some asked, should any category of federal worker be denied back pay by design, given the law's language about retroactive compensation? The answer was loyally and brief. The law would be followed. The subtext was that the administration wanted to preserve negotiating room while avoiding a public brawl over statutory obligations. Then came the evergreen question in any bilateral: will the visitor leave with something tangible in hand? The answer hinted at multiple discussions people don't talk about, and suggested the Canadian delegation would be satisfied with progress, if not a ribbon cutting. It was the language of incrementalism, match fit with a relationship that rolls forward on dozens of files, most of them too technical to make television. Tariffs between the two countries, especially on agriculture, were revisited with examples meant to underline asymmetry from the American vantage point. Historical cases of towering percentage duties were cited as evidence that US producers have faced steep uphill climbs. Any new compact, the message went, would need to take that into account and bring those peaks down, even while the United States reserves the right to keep its own schedule of border taxes when it suits larger industrial aims. Shutdown politics re-entered the conversation with talk of eliminating programs permanently. The framing presented the crisis as an opportunity, an unexpected opening to cut waste, fraud and abuse that otherwise would be mired in congressional horse trading. Specifics were withheld, but the mood music was unmistakable. This is a chance to reset priorities and do it with speed. Allies in the legislature were credited for their roles in passing the signature economic package, and critics across the aisle were dismissed as disorganized and captive to ideas the administration rejects. The exchange detoured sharply into partisan territory. The US leader argued that the current course had rescued a dead country and transformed it into the world's most attractive destination for investment. That contention came with extraordinary figures and sweeping terms, and it was paired with a détente-seeking note toward Canada. Whatever the jousting, goodwill remains, and affection for the neighbour's national sport was offered as a kind of cultural bridge. A practical question followed. Would a deal that excluded sensitive supply-managed sectors like dairy ever be acceptable? The answer was categorical. Comprehensiveness is the point. Anything short of that would simply defer the next fight and undermine the claim that this reset is meant to be durable. Internally, that stance also clarifies marching orders for negotiators. There's little appetite for carve-outs that leave major constituencies unsatisfied. Geopolitics came roaring back when the conversation turned to the Middle East. The pledge was unambiguous. If a deal can be struck, there is enough leverage to keep parties to their commitments. Donald Trump: we are going to do everything possible to make sure everybody adheres to the deal. It was an assertion of both intent and capability, meant to reassure anxious partners and apply pressure on reluctant actors. The promise stood alongside the earlier moral frame of the day's commemoration, linking remembrance with a forward-leaning diplomatic push. Airport delays and the broader logistics disruptions associated with the shutdown drew a predictable question about culpability. The answer assigned blame to the opposition and its leadership, describing a party riven by internal debates and bereft of a coherent plan. Names were named, critiques levelled, and the contrast sharpened between what the administration cast as its common sense platform and what it painted as a programme of excess and confusion on the other side. The rhetorical goal was to make the shutdown not just about appropriations, but about a contest of governing philosophies. As the questioning wore on, another practical point surfaced. What exactly is Canada giving in return for the confidence that it will depart satisfied? Here, too, specifics were held back. The sense was that the answer lives in the details of texts and numbers that aren't yet ready for release, and in the political optics of two leaders projecting comity despite serious differences. Culture made another cameo as the conversation teased a lighter moment, an easy nod to hockey's drama as a reminder that some cross-border bonds need no translation. Even the how many jobs question, always the political core of any policy, was deferred to the near future, a timeline conditioned on how long the shutdown persists. That answer contained a warning. Some roles vanish permanently when a stoppage drags on. The second-order effect, a leaner payroll closer to balance, was floated, implicitly arguing that austerity could be a byproduct rather than a goal. A direct query, had anything the Canadian side done made a deal harder, was met with praise rather than accusation. The visitor, came the reply, is a tough negotiator and a genuine leader, a person who can be agreeable and, when necessary, ferocious. The compliment seemed genuine, but it also served a purpose. Raising the counterpart's stature helped sell any eventual compromise at home. The coda, offered with a grin and unmistakable emphasis, doubled as a candid explanation for delay. Donald Trump, because I want to be a great man too. Negotiations are, after all, not just about clauses and schedules, they are about legacies. Threaded through the session were data points designed to build a narrative arc, the pull of massive domestic demand, the premium of a single continental market, and the contention that prior leaders allowed imbalances to calcify through inattention or ideology. The present approach, fairness via reciprocity, was presented as the correction. If you charge us, we charge you. If you block our cars, we will not be shy about returning the favour. If you subsidise your sectors, we will respond with our own mix of carrots and sticks to make investment choose our side of the line. That philosophy extends well beyond North America. Europe, Japan, and China were invoked as examples of past asymmetry and present adjustment. The implication was that the same playbook applies in every direction. Friendship and alliance do not preclude hard-edged bargaining on market access and industrial advantage. Canada, by that standard, is not uniquely targeted. It is simply too close, too similar, and too critical to escape the friction that comes with trying to do the same things at the same time. Immigration policy, fentanyl, and the health of urban public spaces were fused into a larger law and order case for economic revival. Drugs interdicted, boats stopped, crossings sealed. Those are the inputs, the argument went, to cities that feel governable and attractive for investment. Donald Trump, any amount is too much. The line, delivered about fentanyl, was designed to be morally unassailable and to justify a posture of relentless enforcement. The Canadian side's aside, we've got to stamp it out, tracked with that framing, indicating that on this file, at least, interests are aligned. On China, the message was pragmatic rather than bellicose. Compete or be out-competed. Cooperation where it serves domestic priorities, firmness where it does not. Canada's long commercial experience in China was acknowledged, and the shared task was put in unmistakable terms. Only competitive economies win in that arena. That does not preclude diplomacy. It simply refuses to confuse access with advantage. By the time the session wound down, the rough contours of the moment were clear. This is a relationship that can stretch and strain without snapping because its foundations are thick, shared defence, thick supply chains, and intertwined energy markets that make separation impractical. But it is also a relationship that can no longer pretend that goodwill alone resolves the hardest frictions. Factories need locations, and each country wants the shovels to bite into its soil. There was one more return to the Middle East before the end, an implicit recognition that the day's opening note was the backdrop for everything else. The pledge to apply pressure, diplomatic and otherwise, to keep parties to their word was not couched in caveats. It was framed as both a moral obligation after so much loss and a strategic imperative that aligns close allies, including Canada. If peace is to be more than a pause, discipline is not optional. And then the cadence shifted toward closure. Thanks were offered. Applause rose and fell. The unspectacular truth of these encounters, a mix of prepared points and improvisation, of hard lines and soft compliments, was on full display. The work continues behind closed doors, tariff schedules and sectoral annexes, defence memoranda and migration task forces, plus the countless working groups that turn political promises into enforceable text. The public takeaway, neither a breakthrough nor a breakdown, but a stiff, candid airing of differences wrapped in repeated assurances that the partnership is not just intact, but indispensable. The stakes are enormous: jobs, prices, the political futures of two governments, and the timeline is not infinitely long. Domestic pressures on both sides demand visible progress. Yet even without a signed document to wave, something consequential happened. The terms of trade-offs were laid out clearly enough that each side can now do the math. For all the spikes and jabs, a few lines resonated beyond the day's news cycle. Donald Trump: we have natural conflict. We have mutual love. Donald Trump: we're going to do everything possible to make sure everybody adheres to the deal. Donald Trump: for the most part, we're going to take care of our people. Donald Trump: 0 people were able to come into the United States from the southern border. 0 Donald Trump, because I want to be a great man, too. And from the Canadian side, a promise that has both diplomatic weight and political risk at home. Mark Carney: Canada stands foursquare behind those efforts and will do whatever we can to support. These are the stakes spoken aloud. Peace as an aspiration tethered to enforcement. Prosperity as a prize to be won plant by plant. Partnership as a choice renewed not once, but every time the two countries sit down and attempt to square affection with ambition. In the coming days, the test will be whether the rhetoric translates into edits on a tariff line, a clause on content requirements, and a blueprint for common defence that keeps pace with the world as it is. If that happens, the mood music of this exchange, a blend of flattery, friction, and firm pledges, will have done its job. If not, the next round of questions will only get sharper, and the answers will have to be sharper still. For now, the cameras are off, the staff huddles begin, and the work of turning lines into law resumes where it always does, away from the microphones, deep in the weeds, where the future of two economies that cannot quit each other is hashed out one sentence at a time.